Hi and welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 14 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Have you ever bought or been given a second-hand sewing machine and it turned out to be a dud? Maybe it didn't work properly, or it didn't do the things you needed it to do. Perhaps some part of it was missing. It might have discouraged you from considering second-hand machines again. And if you haven't acquired a second-hand machine before, maybe it's your fear of these things happening that's put you off. Well, in today's solo episode, I'm going to share some key tips that I've learnt the hard way. With these tips in mind, you are more likely to find yourself a second-hand machine that you'll have a long and happy relationship with. I'll also share some tips for getting a machine for free, so stay tuned for a couple of minutes for that. But first, hello lovely listener! Are you doing okay? I've finally got my voice back by and large after my recent spell of hay fever. So, I want to say massive thanks to all you lovely people who left a comment or sent a message saying how much you enjoyed my chat with Meg Grandstaff in last week's episode. I felt it was a bit of a risk to go into the recording having done no prep and keeping things entirely unstructured, but it sounds like most of you didn't mind at all. Flor kindly popped into my inbox to say, I love this latest episode. The energy between you and Meg is infectious and inspiring. Thank you, Flor, and everyone else who commented. So what's on your sewing table at the moment? Anything? Were you inspired to go through your scraps and leftovers and see what you could make from some of them? I certainly was. Since last week's episode, I finished up the swimming bottoms that I made my daughter that was using her favourite undies pattern. She hasn't used them for actual swimming yet, but when she tried them on, she completely unprompted announced that they were really comfortable, which is an epic win. I made those using a damaged remnant of swim lycra, so that's kind of a scrap. I then moved on and made myself 3 pairs of undies, which are a combo of tencel jersey for the back and pieced together scraps of printed jersey for the front. And I think I might have made the perfect combination. Super soft fabric at the back, but bright and fun on the front to make me smile. I'll pop a picture of them in the show notes in case you'd like to see what that combo looks like. Okay, sustainability wins and woes. Well, round our house, we are on the run-up to both my kids' birthdays in a couple of weeks. We've done fairly well with the gifts in terms of environmental impact. As usual, we've got them a mix of new, second-hand and homemade items, which I think is kind of like the best compromise to minimise our impact but not disappointing them too much, you know? So to make a bit of space for the incoming gifts, we've also had a bit of a sort out of games and books and other bits and bobs. I've been distributing them to other families in a mixture of ways. Some bits have been listed on Facebook Marketplace to be sold, and some are listed to be given away via the Olio app. And then some other bits that I know will be accepted have gone to our local charity shop. For some annoying reason, I found myself feeling guilty for trying to sell a couple of games and books that were in excellent condition, rather than just giving them away. So I needed to remind myself that that is all right to do. And in case you need a reminder as well, listen up. Selling items is okay. You are totally allowed to recoup some of the cost of an item whilst also keeping it out of landfill. It is still an eco-conscious move. Cool? Cool. Right. Today, I'm saying a big thanks to Katie and Kat for signing up to support the podcast each month via Patreon. And I've got a big thanks to extend to existing patron Analot, who increased the amount of their support this week as well. You are all awesome and I am super grateful. If you enjoy the podcast and think that the topics we discuss are important and meaningful, please consider supporting the podcast so we can keep making it. You can find the Patreon link in the show notes and it's on the website checkyourthread.com. So let's get into today's episode. I'm going to share with you 4 stories from my sewing life where I acquired second-hand sewing machines and the outcomes were really mixed. 2 were duds and 2 were total wins. And you know what? I could have totally avoided those duds if I'd thought about things a bit more. So I'm going to share a bunch of tips that will help you avoid making a mistake when sourcing a second-hand machine. So no matter where you're sourcing the machine from, these tips will increase your chances of finding your forever machine, or at least your next long-term relationship machine. Remember, as always, there are show notes to be found at checkyourthread.com. That is also the site where you can go and sign up for the free weekly Check Your Thread newsletter. Plus, you can peruse the Check Your Thread shop, where you can find the super helpful Introduction to Garment Fabrics resource. You can also find the link to the Patreon there, and check out all previous episodes with their visuals and show notes. Okay, until next week, please take care of yourself and enjoy! Okay, well, if you permit me, I'd like to start this off by telling you a few little stories. So, I have acquired 4 second-hand sewing machines in my life. The first came to me for free, so I literally found it on the street. So, in 2008, I moved to Barcelona to start an adventurous new chapter of my life. I'd managed to save up a small amount of money, literally like a few £100 to start me off, and I had no job lined up. And all my belongings were stuffed into one small suitcase and one backpack. But pretty soon I managed to set myself up in a flat share and I got a slew of random occasional bits of work. But I was desperately missing my sewing machine. There was no way that I could afford to get my machine sent over, and I didn't have the money to buy one there. But now, in Barcelona, each barrio has a different night of the week where residents put items out on the street that they don't want, and then the council comes along and collects it, probably sending it to landfill. So obviously, those are going to be great nights to go out hunting for free stuff. It was one of my very favourite things to do, particularly because I was very low on funds at the time. Well, one night, just around the corner from my flat at the time, I found a domestic sewing machine by the side of the street. Like, it really felt like a beautiful sign that I should be creating. So I took it home, plugged it in, it switched on okay, but it didn't sew properly. Something mechanical was wrong with it. I didn't know what it was. I was crestfallen and ended up putting it back on the street the very next week. So about 5 years later, after I'd moved back to the UK, I had another go at getting hold of a second-hand sewing machine. This time, I actually got it from a person who repairs and reconditions pre-loved machines. It was a good price, and it was in good working order, and it had everything that was meant to come with it. However, when I got it home and sewed with it for a while, it was okay until I needed to make some buttonholes. The machine didn't have a buttonhole function. I'd forgotten to check that the machine was capable of everything that I needed from it. If I'd kept that machine, I would have had to fudge making buttonholes by adjusting the zigzag stitch, to make various widths and lengths of satin stitch to craft each part of a buttonhole. Not something that at that point in my sewing life I was prepared to do anymore. So I returned it to the seller and suffered a frustrating period of not being able to sew until I worked out what to do next. But then there was my first ever overlocker, a second-hand Frister and Rossmann, so basic you couldn't even adjust the differential feed. I bought it from a bricks and mortar sewing machine shop that sold a mixture of new and reconditioned machines, and I got it for about £60, I think. It was in great condition when I got it, and it had the manual which answered loads of my early questions about overlockers. And it ran like an absolute charm, and I had it for over 16 years. I kept it in good health with regular services, but eventually something irreplaceable broke. But I consider that a long, happy and very successful relationship. It died just before lockdown, so I wasn't able to source myself another straight away, but the sewing shop that I was teaching at the time kindly lent me a brand new Janome overlocker, and that served me for about 6 months until I had to give it back. It was fine, but I didn't love it. So when lockdown lifted enough for me to be able to contact my local repairs and service person, I told him exactly what I was looking for from an overlocker, and I bought another reconditioned one. And it would have been really expensive if it were new, and it runs like a dream. I had her serviced after a couple of years to keep her in tip-top condition, and we are still going strong. So why did those first 2 encounters with second-hand sewing machines go so wrong and result in frustration, when the second 2 occasions were wonderful? Well, let me tell you, it's not luck. I'm going to tell you all the tips that I learned through my 4 experiences, plus lessons I've gathered from other people's experiences. I've put them all into this episode so you don't have to end up with a dud of a second-hand machine. Instead, they should help you enjoy a long and beautiful relationship that will help reduce your impact on the planet and your bank balance compared to buying new. But first, let's talk about why it's a good idea to source a second-hand sewing machine or overlocker/serger. There's definitely some built-in risk that buying a brand new machine doesn't have, so why bother? Okay, when we buy anything that has been owned by someone else, as opposed to buying something brand new from the shop, we are reducing demand for the extraction and processing of virgin resources. We are also avoiding the use of a lot of energy and therefore fossil fuel usage that would have been required to manufacture a new product. Plus, we are helping all those embedded resources and energy that created the second-hand item stay in use for longer. Sewing machines are a big financial outlay for anyone wanting to sew, and second-hand machines can also save you money, so that is definitely a factor to consider if you are looking to upgrade or expand your existing setup and are working to a budget. It's really likely that you could find a fancier, higher quality model, second-hand, for the same price as a brand new but more basic machine. However, I do want to acknowledge that many people feel more secure in buying a brand new product. Not everyone has easy access to a trusted source of second-hand machinery, plus lots of new products bought from a shop may offer guarantees or customer support. And ultimately, if a brand new machine will have a longer lifespan with you, and hopefully beyond you, then it may be a better use of those resources, energy and money anyhow. No one can tell you which avenue is best for you. Personally, I've owned second-hand and brand new machines, and I can say that each individual machine and the acquisition of it has had its own particular collection of positives and negatives. So I'm not demonising buying a brand new machine, nor do I want to make anyone feel guilty for having bought a new machine in the past. However, if we are to avoid the worst of climate change, we need to be looking for all sorts of ways that we can reduce the production and consumption of new products. It is totally possible to get great sewing machines second-hand, as my stories at the top can attest to. So if you decide to acquire a machine in the future and want to explore the second-hand options open to you, here are some tips that will hopefully help you make a successful acquisition. But I guess I also briefly need to define what I mean by second-hand. So for the purposes of this episode, I'm including all machines, regular sewing machines, overlockers or sergers, cover stitch machines, specific quilting or embroidery machines if those are a jam, that have been owned by someone else before you. I'm not making any distinction between how heavily or lightly the previous owners have used that item. And I know that there are many fans of vintage sewing machines. I'm talking pre-computerized models, usually with a metal casing. And many of those vintage sewing machine fans consider vintage sewing machines in an entirely separate category to the more modern machines that have been owned by someone else. I want to acknowledge that, and at some point I'll do an episode that includes content on vintage sewing machines specifically. But today I'm talking about all pre-loved or unloved but previously bought machines, because it's also possible to find someone selling a brand new sewing machine that's like an unwanted Christmas present or something. So even if you'd prefer to buy new, it may be worth your while not to completely discount pre-owned options. Right, we'll get into where to source second-hand machines in a bit, but spoiler alert, some of those sources do not involve a helpful salesperson talking you through the features of various models. And even if you do source one that way, it's really worth taking some time to work out what you actually need from the machine before time so it's clear in your mind. Because as my story about the second-hand sewing machine can attest to, even if it didn't cost you much, getting a machine that doesn't do what you need it to is going to be a waste of time, money and effort. Plus, you then got the hassle of them passing it on and replacing it. So the answer to the question of what you need from a machine will be slightly different for everyone. It will be subject to experience level, sewing goals, interests and physical requirements. You might have to be somewhat flexible as your budget, location and luck will all factor in, but it's good to know what your wish list actually is as you approach assessing a machine. So if you're looking for a regular machine, here are some features to consider. A few different styles of stitch. So straight stitch and zigzag stitch are your basics. These will take you a long way and theoretically you wouldn't need anything else as long as they are adjustable, which we'll get to in a sec. However, try to think ahead if there are any others that you could imagine making use of. So here are a few that you might wish to seek out. A 3-step zigzag. That's a stitch that could be really useful for hemming knits and making underwear, swimwear and dancewear. A lightning flash stitch. This is great for sewing the seams on knit garments, although a zigzag stitch that can be made very narrow should work equally well. What about an overedge or overcast stitch? And that creates a kind of faux overlocked or surged effect. These can help you make a neater job of the garment innards without having to shell out for a whole additional overlocker or serger. Okay, so look for adjustable stitch length and stitch width. So all but the most basic models should allow you to do this, but definitely check if the machine in question can do so before you buy it. So adjusting the length and width of the different stitch types will allow you to use the straight stitch and the zigzag stitch for all sorts of applications, including making bar tacks, top stitching, basting and creating gathers. Okay, so look out for, as I should have done previously, a buttonhole function. So if you're at the beginning of your sewing journey, you may be intimidated by the prospect of making garments that include buttons and buttonholes. And although you probably don't want to dive into those in your first couple of projects, neither do you want to limit yourself further down the line. So a 1-step buttonhole function is arguably the easiest type of buttonhole function that sewing machines can feature. However, there are other types of buttonhole function that do work perfectly well that you can get used to using. Okay, a free arm. This means that a section of the base of the sewing machine can be removed. This allows you to stitch hems, sleeves, cuffs and trouser legs far more easily than with a machine without this detachable section. Do you need any accessibility functions? So if you have specific requirements that are necessary for you to use a sewing machine, don't forget to include these in your search. So these features may include a start-stop button, additional lights, an automatic needle threader, automatic thread trimming, automatic presser foot lift, speed control, foot pedal settings, automatic backstitch function, knee-operated presser foot lift, and more. This isn't really a function, but think about if new parts can be found relatively easily and cheaply. We'll cover this again in a bit, but it can be a good plan to talk to your local servicing person before you buy anything, new or secondhand, to check that they would be able to source the spare parts for it as and when they're needed in the future. Buying a cheap but obscure model of machine may end up costing you quite a bit more over the course of its working life, or you may need to ditch it completely if the parts can't be sourced anymore. Right, also consider the weight of the machine. So those older models with the metal casings are heavy, no denying. This might not be much of a problem if you've got a permanent spot for your machine to live, but you will most likely need to move it at some point. So consider what you are physically able to lift and, if necessary, carry, and factor that in when you're looking at your options. Okay, so sourcing second-hand machines. We're actually talking about getting one now. Okay, so let's get into it. From the most expensive to the least expensive avenues for obtaining second-hand sewing machines, along with some tips for success pertaining to each one. And I say obtaining because some of the options do not involve money. So, depending on your budget and your location, not all these options will be available to you. So bear that in mind. Okay, here we go. Sewing shops and dealerships. So in your area, the sewing scene may be served by bigger sewing shops or dealerships that might stock a range of reconditioned machines. And you might be able to then go in and test those out, as you would if you were shopping for brand new machines. So the benefit of this type of venue is that you can really try before you buy, and hopefully there's someone knowledgeable there to guide you with your selection. So the salesperson may be genuinely helpful or annoyingly biased in some way. But either way, the machines that you're looking at will probably be a bit more expensive because of the overheads of the shop and the staff costs. However, you should be free to physically test out and really grill the salesperson to make sure that the machine can do what you need it to. It's highly likely that it will come with its original manual, and it might even come with some kind of warranty, which is particularly important if you're interested in buying a computerized sewing machine, because if the motherboard is broken, it can be costly to replace. Another plus, if you're buying from one of these shops, is that you can easily return it if you're not happy, meaning this is the most supported and protected way to obtain a second-hand machine. As you heard, I bought my first overlocker via this route and it really did serve me well. Okay, the step cheaper, and my preferred option these days, is seeking out your local independent servicing and repairs person and see if they sell reconditioned machines. They probably won't have a bricks and mortar shop, and they often work out of a private workshop or from their home. So you can find them using an online search that includes the area that you live in, via a business directory such as Yellow Pages, or you could ask in your local sewing shop or haberdashers. So a reconditioned sewing machine from one of these people is, in my opinion, preferable to buying one on a second-hand site such as eBay or Gumtree or in the local ads, because a professional will have already made sure it's in good working order. Plus, they would have made sure that it's been stored properly, as older models can dry out when they're stored in a loft or garage. Granted, a reconditioned second-hand machine may cost more than an eBay or Gumtree option bought directly from someone who no longer uses it, but it's likely you'll have to pile the additional cost onto the latter by getting it serviced anyhow. So as you've heard, I've bought 2 sewing machines so far this way. There was the regular sewing machine that was in good working order, but I made the mistake of not specifying my needs in terms of the functions. And the second example was my current overlocker, which is working out really well. I specified really clearly what I was looking for in terms of functionality, and then the repairs guy talked me through everything that he had in stock at the time, and he helped me make the right selection. And I knew that if it hadn't felt right or done what I wanted and I changed my mind, he would have been willing to swap it for another. So, this third option is possibly cheaper, but is one up in terms of risk, is to seek out a second-hand machine online via eBay, Gumtree, Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or some other listing site like that. So be sure to check the location of the seller and the item, because unless it's being sold by a shop or store that is used to sending things out properly packaged, you're risking a poorly packaged sewing machine being damaged in transit. So if you have the option to collect something in person, make sure you filter your search to the physical distance that you are willing and able to collect from. You may or may not have some kind of buyer protection through these selling sites, so bear that in mind. So Christmas is obviously a time when people might be upgrading their sewing machinery. So January might be a particularly fruitful time to search for a second-hand machine locally. And if you have found one on eBay or Gumtree or Facebook or local ads, etc., and it looks like a steal, hold your horses and speak to your local servicing and repairs person before you submit your bid or commit to purchase. So make it clear to your repairs person that if you buy the machine, they'll have your business for getting it serviced, and then ask them for the lowdown on how easy they think it's going to be to get parts for that new model, and generally if they think it's going to be a good bet. And then if you do buy it, make good on your promise to use them to service it later. Getting a machine serviced fairly often is the best plan anyway, so you may as well start off your relationship with that machine with it in good working order from the beginning. In general, I'd advise against buying a computerized model without seeing it in use so you can confirm that the motherboard is not gone, which, as I mentioned, is really costly to replace. This goes for all avenues of buying second-hand machines, but before you buy a second-hand machine, see if it comes with its original manual. However, if the one for your machine is missing, there's a decent chance that you can get hold of a digitized copy online. So those are the buying options, but it might be possible to source a sewing machine for nothing. Obviously, being given one for free is the most budget-friendly option. I think it probably doesn't need to be said, but if a free sewing machine is on the cards, you may have to hold your wish list of preferred features and functions very lightly. And for this to pan out, you're going to have to keep your eyes peeled in the right spots or ask at the right venues and be patient. So there's your local buy nothing or freebie Facebook groups. There are free sharing websites including FreeCycle and Freegal. And there are free sections of Craigslist and Gumtree, and they might occasionally have listings of sewing machines being offered. Remember, frequent checking and patience may be required. However, putting it out there into the world that you're looking for a machine might speed things up. Most FreeCycle, Freegal and Buy Nothing groups have the ability to submit requests as well as offers, as does the Olio app actually last time I checked. I've even seen people just straight up ask for a specific item on my local area's general Facebook group. But why does this work? Often people can't be bothered to list unwanted items, particularly if they're clearing out like an entire house or it's an item that they just don't know anything about and they just can't be bothered to research. And others, they just like the thrill of knowing that their thing has gone to someone who genuinely wants and will use it. So post a polite request and keep your fingers crossed, and the stars might align in your favour. Remember, there's a possibility that if you're given a machine, it might be broken or malfunctioning, or generally in need of some TLC. So find your nearest servicing repairs person and get it looked at. Obviously, servicing and repairs cost money unless you plan to undertake the work yourself. But if it's a decent machine and the repair person thinks that the work is worth doing, you'll get yourself a good machine that will be kept out of landfill or the scrap heap for longer. So that's free machines. If you're currently only semi-convinced that sewing will be for you, or if you're looking for other ways to keep costs as low as possible for a while, borrowing a sewing machine is another option. Many people have sewing machines at home that are just laying dormant. And if one of those people is a friend, relative or colleague of yours, they may be happy to lend you theirs for a period of time. This might also tide you over whilst you continue your search for the right machine to buy. However, please note that if the owner is happy for you to borrow the machine, it may have laid unused for some time, or even been put aside because there was an issue that they forgot to tell you about. Therefore, it may be necessary to take it to the service and repairs person to get things working well before you can really begin. So that's an expense and hassle you might need to factor in. But whatever machine you have to work with, be that free, borrowed, purchased brand new or purchased second-hand, that machine needs to work well or you're never going to want to actually use it. If you are blessed by your location, another borrowing option might be through your public library. Check Your Thread listener Cristin let me know that the Brooklyn Public Library in New York lends out sewing machines for up to 3 weeks at a time. Apparently they stock different types of machine, plus different feet and even needles. Similarly, lending libraries are becoming ubiquitous. Because mending is firmly aligned with the general ethos of a lot of those enterprises, I'd all but guarantee that any lending library local to you will have a sewing machine in their inventory. The London-based Library of Things lends out a mid-range John Lewis sewing machine for £8 per day or £32 per week. It's not super cheap, but you could get a number of projects cut out in advance and then set aside a day or a weekend perhaps. So you can whip up some projects and get your sewing fix whilst you figure out a longer-term solution. Also, sewing shops, studios and maker spaces often offer like open sewing sessions. And these are cheaper than taking a tutor-directed class. So in these sessions, you can work on your own project of choice and just use their equipment, effectively renting it by the hour or the session. Depending how it's run, at some venues you'll be completely left alone to crack on with your project. However, other sessions may be supervised by an experienced sewer who's on hand to offer assistance. That might be a great opportunity to get some useful nuggets of wisdom to help you on your way without shelling out for a whole proper class. Okay, making your machines last. So once you've got hold of your lovely new-to-you sewing machine, to keep that investment in good condition and working well for many years, it will require a little effort from you. No matter where you bought it, the financial and environmental investment you just made will be best protected by doing the following. Remove lint regularly. The dust and fluff that accumulates in sewing machines and overlockers, aka sergers, can really impede their ability to function properly. So make sure to always suck the dust or lint outwards. Don't blow it back in and risk doing more damage elsewhere in the workings. Most overlockers or sergers have 2 doors to allow you to access the inside. The insides can get quickly fuzzed up, especially when using knit fabrics. So try to remember to brush out the fuzz after each project. Regular sewing machines can collect lint around and underneath the needle plate, as well as in and around the bobbin holder, or the bobbin case if your machine is a front loader. Some machines come with a little brush for the purpose of cleaning it out, however a soft paintbrush can work really well. Sometimes you can also use a vacuum to remove lint. Keep it covered. So obviously, sewing machines are originally sold with some kind of case or covering, usually a hard moulded plastic one, or a flimsy plastic covering about the thickness of a sturdy shopping bag. Older vintage machine cases often look like small solid pieces of luggage. So the purpose of a cover is to protect the machine from dust and receiving the odd accidental whack, or from kiddie fingers pricking themselves or messing up the settings if you've got kids around. Obviously, a solid case will do a better job at these tasks, particularly if you keep your machine on the floor when it's off duty. However, a lightweight cover may be all that's really needed, especially if your machine lives on a table or desk or shelf most of the time. In my opinion, the best case is one that can be taken off and put back on quickly. So if opportunities or energy levels for sewing can be hard to come by for you, you don't want an awkward or heavy machine case creating a barrier for sewing, I reckon. And clearing away with speed may be also important for similar reasons, particularly if your sewing space is on view or it needs to be packed away completely at the end of each sewing session. So hopefully your second-hand machine will have come with its original case. But if it didn't, or the one that has isn't ideal, consider making one. It's an easy project that can be made using scraps and leftovers from other projects, or even by harvesting fabric from unwanted garments. There is an abundance of free patterns and tutorials for making your own sewing machine or overlocker cover. There's a great tutorial by Closet Claw Patterns, plus heaps of others including YouTube videos if you prefer. Okay, another one. Store it inside and keep it lubricated. So if space is at a premium in your home or your sewing sessions are infrequent, you may be tempted to store your machine in the garage or even the cellar or the loft. My servicing repairs person warned me against this because being in cold or drafty places isn't great for machinery and it can dry them out. So if at all possible, keep your machines somewhere in the main part of your home. Plus, some sewing machines require regular oiling or lubrication, although some newer models are designed so it isn't really necessary. So check your machine's manual or consult your servicing repairs person to find out if yours needs this, and if so, where to do it and with what product. Last one, regular servicing. So exactly how often you should facilitate a once-over for your machine is related to how frequently it gets used and how old it is. So I would say that for a machine that gets a fair amount of use, a service every couple of years is a good benchmark. You could do this yourself. If your machine is a newer type, and definitely if it's computerized, I would recommend you call in the professionals. As mentioned by now multiple times, find your local servicing and repairs person. Some servicing people will require you to drop off and collect the machine yourself, whilst others can do this for you, so factor that in if you need to pick between a couple. Also, find out how busy they are if you can't bear to be apart from your machine for long. But if you are experiencing hiccups related to your machine, it's always worth phoning them up and asking for advice. It may be an issue that with some guidance you can solve yourself and won't require a full-on professional investigation. Okay, so upping your success for a great relationship with a second-hand sewing machine. In summary, first of all, be clear what you need from a sewing machine or your overlocker. Is this a wish list or a must-have list? Then, based on this, decide what avenue for accessing second-hand machines you're prepared to try, or research what options are open to you locally and financially. The avenues for second-hand sewing machines that may be open to you are sewing shops and dealerships, independent repair people who sell reconditioned machines, and online via eBay, Gumtree, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, or local listings. Or you could try your hand at finding a machine for free via FreeCycle or Buy Nothing groups. Consider posting requests to speed things up. Or if you're looking for an interim rather than a permanent option, ask around if anyone has one you can borrow. Plus, some public libraries have machines you can borrow for free. Borrowing a machine for a fee can happen via lending libraries or by the hour or session at some sewing shops and sewing schools. Then, once you've accessed your second-hand sewing machine, keep that machine in good working order for as long as possible. Do that by removing lint regularly, keeping it covered, keeping it indoors, keeping it lubricated if necessary, and getting it serviced regularly. Always know who your local repairs and servicing person is. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with a pro tip. It is possible to become your own service and repairs person, particularly if the machine that you've got is a vintage kind of all metal casing one. They're usually much easier to maintain. But even if it's a newer electronic but not computerised machine, it could be worth a DIY tinker. The first step to becoming your own service and repairs person is to get hold of the manual. If your machine has been separated from its manual, do an online search with the make and model of your machine. There's some businesses that have popped up that sell scanned copies of sewing machine manuals, and you can buy them really cheaply in PDF form. Also, if you're a Facebook user or can rope in someone who is, there are some Facebook groups specifically for certain brands or even models of sewing machines, and sometimes they have machine manuals freely accessible in like the files section of the group. Otherwise, try searching for tutorials or YouTube videos or blog posts on sewing machine maintenance and repair. And you should also be able to get tips on sourcing spare parts as and when they're needed. So there you go. Hopefully you feel confident to try sourcing a second-hand machine the next time you're in the market for one. If you have any tips for acquiring second-hand sewing machines that you think I've missed, please drop me a line via email, Zoe@checkyourthread, or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. And if you found this episode useful, please share it with a pal who sews or share it via social. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!